Hey, welcome back to Guardberia. This is the next chapter of the Emily Bronze series, and we have a few more voices to add to the cast to give you guys a bit more audio variety in terms of the people playing these voice parts. Before I get to them, be sure to stop by the coffee link, buy yourself a book, or donate to the page. Donations will matter a bit more now because YouTube still doesn't like me for whatever reason. So more or less your donations make this page go round. Either you can donate via the coffee link or buy a book via the coffee link. Both help keep the channel going. Additionally, stop by Skull Splitter Dice for all your click-clack rock needs. I do get commission from Skull Splitter Dice, and they're pretty fun people. So if you want some dice or some other D&D accessories, stop by Skull Splitter Dice and pick up something you need. There's also Redcon 1, where you can go to get all your things you're going to need for protein and gains and supplements and pre-workout and everything you're going to require to go to the gym and gym hard. You can do that via Redcon 1. Protein bars, protein shakes, pre-workout, breakfast bars, everything you need to live a nice, healthy lifestyle and be here for more stories in the future. So we're going to let the newcomers introduce themselves, and then you'll hear the Beldam's sweet sultry tones in this upcoming chapter. So, hope you enjoy.
Hey everyone, my name's Kate. I'm 20 years old, and at the moment I work in a retirement home. I'm from Canada, and I got into voice acting because I just love getting to play a character and getting into the roles and spreading the love of shows and characters and books that people love, and it's just a really fun gig, to be honest. I never saw myself doing voice acting, but now I love it and could not see my life without it. So yeah, that's all about me.
Hey everyone, I'm Emerson, aka the Artistic Writer. This is just a short introduction on myself. I'm a chef and baker by day, aspiring voice actor and fiction author by night. All around. I'm currently working on several projects, including a high fantasy book series, tabletop RPG system set in the world of said series, the storyboard for a PC horror game that my 9-year-old daughter is running. Currently on Twitch for a new YouTube channel based around world building for fiction, which will be up and running just as soon as I find some content. We'll keep an eye out for that.
Chapter 12. New Guy in Town. Morel stood 5 feet away near the entry door into the main building, while the rest of the crew were gathered around the Lamian and pestering him with things they wanted for the uniform. It was a struggle, but she managed to keep an immediate snarl from her face when he came to her and asked the centaur the kinds of things that would make life easier for her when it came to her own uniform. As Morel looked at him while telling him she wanted more pockets and proper tactical saddlebags, she took in his face and overall appearance. The Lamian had quickly succumbed to human fashion senses, wearing a heavy cotton hoodie and a graphic tee of a massive reptilian kaiju. The only thing Lamian of him clothing-wise was his clan shamraka, a waist wrap that covered the area where their human body terminated and serpentine body began. His was comprised of sea green and red stripes, and at intervals he had woven in bells that jangled slightly as he moved. If Morel held up her hand and blocked out the rest of his body, she had to begrudgingly admit that he was fetching, and it annoyed her even further. The Lamian was definitely a homebody, as his hands and face bore no scars of hard work or combat. If anything, he seemed soft, a city dweller that knew not the heft of the spear or the rolling sweat of hard work. Even his arms were slender, only sporting a minimal amount of muscle along his frame. His face was freckled with small golden scales that matched the scales of his lower body, the stomach of which was adorned with larger creamy white plates. He also wore a lot of silver rings on his hands, which Morel found annoying simply on principle, and she noticed his pointed Lamian ears were sporting modern human ear ornaments. His fair hair was also twisted and braided with even more silver jewelry, and Morel wondered that if she hung him upside down near a breeze, would he chime. While the Lamian chatted to Emily again about gorgons, Morel flexed her left arm under her right hand and felt the muscles underneath, giving them a soft squeeze. "I'm definitely stronger than this guy," Morrill murmured, and continued to angrily glare at the Lamian in the distance as he conversed. Ogledock opened the door Morrill was standing in front of, and was humming to himself, rifling through a stack of papers in his hand. "Mr. Mela?" Ogledock called out, pulling out a few of the papers from the stack and moving around to Morrill's bulk. The Lamian raised his head from Emily and smiled brightly to Ogledock, and his soft voice called back,
Over here, Mr. Ogledock.
Morrill rolled her eyes at the same time Ogledock smiled at him, and if it wasn't for the fact she wanted to keep an eye on Emily, she would have gone inside the company building just to get away from Mela. Ogledock strode towards him and held out his hand, at which Mela took it in both of his, the bells on his belt jingling from how vigorously he shook them. The changeling chuckled. "Ah, good to see you are as enthusiastic in person as you are over email. I see you've met the troublemaker." Emily leveled her eyebrows at Ogledock, not twisting her head too far in his direction, but bounced on the heels of her boots a beat or two. "We were talking about the Gorgons. Apparently they don't get along with Lamians too well." Mela sighed and released Ogledock's hand, setting his hands on his hips.
Yes, and after what I've heard of their tactics in Las Vegas, that's not going to change anytime soon either. Amazing what being a warrior tribe does to the brain. Anywho, I've got a lot of good ideas from your lads and ladies, and I believe I can get things running pretty smoothly here in a few days. We've had to find a place to get our workshop started that was on the warmer side. Rather cold up here, surprisingly.
"Didn't read the thermal map?" Ogledock asked, handing the pinched papers towards him. Mela took the papers, and his ring-laden fingers quickly flicked through them as he smiled.
To be honest, I thought the colors were population measures.
Emily let forth a giggle, and the sound was like ice to Morrill's heart. The centaur took a few steps forward, arms folded menacingly, but wanting to be counted in on the conversation. "I'd to miss the large letters that say elevation and temperatures on the arrival docket." Mela looked at Morrill sheepishly, shrugging his shoulders.
Yeah, well, my mother said I was never a reader or a scholar.
"Ugh," Morrill murmured, while Emily slapped Mela on the shoulder gamely. "Well, you may be dumb, but at least you're pretty, ain't?" Ogledock rolled his head towards Emily, handing Mela another paper he had finished out from the stack. "Emily?" "What?" Emily asked, grinning at Ogledock while Mela did his damnedest to intently read the paper Ogledock had given him, and use it to block line of sight to his face. Mela cleared his throat, coiling his lower body in a protective manner.
Ah, yes, I believe these shouldn't be too hard to make either. Our rucksacks found locally not good enough.
Ogledock shrugged. Logo rucksacks are fine, but they lack certain features to keep them on your body in case of a fall and a quick stop. Mela nodded, flicked his eyes towards Emily, who was still grinning at him, to Morrill, who was almost snarling at him, then back to Ogledock. He held open his arms and tilted his torso slightly, causing his bells to jingle lightly. He tried to keep his voice light to hide his sudden nervousness.
Well, regardless, it shouldn't be an issue. My clan is more than ready to take large orders, and these are very manageable.
"So your whole clan came with?" Emily asked, her eyes locked intently on Mela's. Mela brought his knuckles together, tapping the broad edges of his rings together.
Oh, yeah, all 50 of us came through. This seems like a pretty good place to make some serious money, so we came through together just to make things easier. Most of the Hyla clan stayed back, as they don't have much to do around here unlike us Cthulhu.
Morrill perked up her ears at this bit of information. "The Halia clans didn't want to come through? I thought you two castes ran together." Out of reflex, Mela had straightened up slightly to meet Morrill's height.
Oh, well, usually yes. However, the Hyla clan see this place as cursed and not their problem. We came here on our own.
Emily looked up between Morrill and Mela, then tapped them both on the stomach. She noticed through her finger that Mela was sporting some serious muscle on his tummy, not unlike Morrill.
"Hey, fantasy race people, y'all are using words I don't know and it's confusing me."
Morrill let a gentle smile tweak her lips when Emily poked her, while Mela shrank down in height again, bells jingling as he coiled.
Ah, I'm sorry. I'm a Cthulhu, a caste of Lamians that are the crafters of my species. The Hyla are a warrior caste, and they take care of most of our militaristic duties.
"They're also twice the height and width of a Cthulhu. A Hyla in his prime would make Mela here look like a grass racer."
Morrill added in, and she grinned more at Mela, instinctively flexing her muscles. Mela glowered up at her, and Emily noticed the tip of his tail twitching in an irritated fashion.
A Hyla does not get far without the armor of a Cthulhu, no matter how strong they may be.
Morrill leaned down towards him. "I wouldn't know how that is, since us centaurs do it all ourselves, no matter what standard we fall under."
I know a few things centaurs can't do themselves.
Mela said in a growl, and held up his arms in an L shape, clenching his fists as the bells on his shamraka jingled.
You little...
Moril started, her arms coming open and fingers clawed as sudden fury rippled through her eyes. Her onslaught was cut short by Agildoc clearing his throat, as the changeling had been standing aside the entire time with a look on his face that said, "We have far better things we could all be doing." "Morel?" Moril shook with indignant fury, her arms down at her sides and shaking fists balled.
What?
"Go inside. There is no need to have an interspecies blood feud in my loading bay," Agildoc said flatly. Moril sputtered and held out her hands towards Mela, who flinched back and made to voice her objections, but Agildoc cut her off with a jab of his pen at Emily. "You go ahead and make sure he has all the information he needs, then walk him back out. Also, Mr. Mela, next time park out front. That way you can just use the front door." Emily, who was still standing between the two, raised her brows when Agildoc pointed his pen at her, but held up 2 thumbs up near her stomach as she leaned against Moril, keeping the centaur from getting any closer to the Lamian.
"Can do. Moril, chill out and I'll help you brush your hair later."
Moril's face was still bright with anger as she stared at Mela, but at Emily's words, her hot blood lost a fair bit of its steam. She didn't reply, but punched a fist into the open palm of her other hand with a harsh smack of skin, then turned and made her way towards the rear door of the company building. Emily watched her stalk away, and before Moril went through the door, she kicked out fiercely with her hoof, leaving a large dent in the metal wall of the loading bay. Agildoc squinted while Emily chuckled and turned to Mela.
"Ain't she sweet? Seriously, though, I would avoid pissing her off on purpose. I think she could literally rip you in half with her biceps."
Mela still looked quite peeved and shook slightly with the adrenaline coursing through his body, the tremblings making his bells chime softly.
She behaves like a barbarian, and the similarities between her and her Hyla are cousin-like.
"Oh, calm down, Snake Man. Come on, I'll walk you to the gate," Emily said, and turned, opening the side door to the motor pool. As the two came back out into the warm sun of the morning, Mela tucked his hands inside his hoodie's center pocket and gave a jittering shake that caused his bells to rattle.
Buh. How do you humans handle such a chill all the time?
Emily looked up and around at the sky, then waggled her hand in the air as if trying to gauge the temperature.
"Chill? It's like 70 out here. You need to toughen up."
Mela blew a light raspberry through his lips as he slid across the ground, his torso leaning slightly from side to side with the rhythm of his shamraka.
Anything below 80 is like winter to me.
Emily whistled, tucking her hands into her pockets as she strode beside Mela.
"You sure did learn the advanced English fast."
It's our clan. We pick up on training and learning quite fast. However, this whole driving thing is another animal altogether. I had to walk here.
Emily stopped mid-step, and Mela slid to a stop beside her. "You walked here? From where?" Mela scritched at his cheek scales.
Downtown? Took a few hours, but it shouldn't take much more than that to get back.
Emily pursed her lips and nodded her head, now noticing that there was in fact no vehicle near the gate.
"Aha! Well, would you like to get there faster? Maybe we can pick up lunch on the way there."
Mela looked surprised, and the tip of his tail twitched.
A free ride and free food. How can a merchant say no?
Mela was shaking like a leaf when he coiled over the exit door of Emily's sidecar, and his shamraka was jangling so much it was as if the Lamian was caught in a paint shaker. People on the sidewalk smirked or laughed quietly to themselves as Mela heaved in great lungfuls of breaths, steadying himself against a Range Rover parked next to them. Emily took off her helmet and shook her braid, sighing happily as the Zundap cooled underneath her. She looked over towards the sweat-soaked Mela and blinked. "You okay? Sounded like you were screaming when we took that turn back there."
I'm fine,
Mela panted, and after getting his bearings, he stood up straight, peeling back the hair that was stuck to his sweaty face.
How fast were we going?
Emily thought back while placing her helmet down into the sidecar.
50, I think."
Mela grimly thought back to the blur of a sign he remembered seeing fly past them on their way into town.
50? The sign back there said 30.
"Potato, potato."
Emily mused and stood up from her bike, her boots thumping down onto the ground beside it. After gathering up the Lamian and waiting for his nerves to settle, the two made their way inside the Café Calamity Mames. Emily did this for 2 reasons. The rest of the cafes in the area sucked, and she also wanted to see how Lamians sat in chairs. Much to her disappointment, Mela instead opted for a booth and happily curled himself up behind the table. Tootie was off that day, it seemed, as another, more tired, horned waitress sidled up to the table. Her horns were short, coming off the side of her head in small swoops that reached towards the sky. Her hair was dirty blonde and disheveled, as it appeared that the lunch rush was not going well today, and the finality of her nerves glowed from within her mossy green eyes.
Hey, welcome to Callum. Oh, Emily, it's you.
She said, her voice barely maintaining the upbeat tempo that all waiters were forced to muster while doing their job. She sighed out in relief and came back to her normal voice, that kind of low rumble that begged for a shot of whiskey and the soft burn of a cigarette.
Glad to see you back. Thought you were gun-shy after what happened with Tootie.
Hey, Sophia. How is she?
Emily asked as Malaya looked between the two and awkwardly fiddled with his menu. Sophia set down a coaster in front of Mela, then set down one in front of Emily.
She's fine. She's not sore about what happened either. Just caught one of your human colds. She's done nothing but bellyache about it since yesterday, and I wind up having to bring her juice and other shit when she gets too loud.
Emily sighed in relief, and when she saw that Sophia had nothing else to add, she held up a finger.
Sweet tea for me.
Malaya looked up from the menu clutched in his hands, and Emily became quickly aware that the Lamian did not get out much in places such as this. Even now his eyes were wandering about the dining room to all the gruff figures sitting and eating, or talking and drinking coffee. The closest comparison Emily could think of was that he looked like a college freshman deciding to try and grab a drink at a biker bar. Mela began to nervously flush as he once again ran his finger down the list of drinks, and Sophia impatiently tapped her pen on her notepad while swiveling her eyes to Emily.
New arrival?
Very new. Emily nodded, and Mela's tail tip jittered in annoyance at the knowledge they were talking about him. Triumphantly, Mela stabbed his finger at the menu and looked up at Sophia with happy, bright eyes.
I want this. It sounds fancy.
Sophia leaned over, using her pen to tip down the menu so she could see better, and Mela made a pointed attempt to look anywhere else but her shirt collar. Emily saw this and gave a snort, folding her arms on her chest.
That's usually a kid's drink, but I can make an exception,
Sophia said with a smirk, but wrote it down on her pad and walked away. Emily raised an eyebrow at Mela, but he sat smugly and laced his fingers together.
So,
Emily began, crossing her leg under the table.
I heard from a friend that your race was hesitant to come over here. Why's that?
Mela looked around at the picture-covered walls as he spoke.
Well, our oracles say this world is doomed, or something or the other. They say they foresee a great calamity, an unbinding of many planes of existence.
Are you sure they weren't talking about the first flood? Emily asked, and she lightly pinched the fabric of her jacket with her thumb and pointer finger, the gesture hidden away by her crossed arms.
Oh, quite sure. Oracles are fussy folk, and they always make it quite clear that they are talking about the future and all that.
Mela mused, and he tried to smile at another woman who was sitting nearby. The woman in question was a tomboy aircraft mechanic named Olivia, and she bared her teeth at Mela aggressively. Mela shrank back slightly, and his smile died on his lips like a flower in the hot sun.
Don't mind Olivia,
Emily said, and she tried to give Mela a comforting smile.
She's a bit aggressive. She was part of our Air Force down at Tinker, and their state was almost swallowed whole by the floods. She lost her fiancé to the cultists and has been a grouch ever since.
Is that why she cut her hair so short?
Mela asked, and his smile came back when he saw Sophia coming with their drinks.
No, I'm pretty sure that's so she doesn't get sucked into an engine,
Emily said with a laugh, while in the background Olivia made mock-laughing motions with her head, then stabbed into her steak as if it owed her a blood debt. Sophia came around to their table and set down Emily's tea, then set down another glass in front of Mela. Emily furrowed her brows in confusion and wondered just where the hell Sophia managed to find a spiraled straw. Chocolate milk? Emily asked, and couldn't help but slightly tilt her head at how excited Mela was over the prospect of the drink.
And fancy straw? I only saw these in the old books they gave us to look over. Do you by chance have the kind that you wear on your face?
Mela asked with vigor, which he held the glass close to his nose so he could smell the dark-colored milk. Sophia barely managed to keep her bark of laughter under control and cleared her throat.
Sorry, but you're stretching your luck there. We only had this one by luck.
Oh, it's fine. You can only hope for such things.
Mela said happily and lightly slurped at the edge of his glass. Emily and Sophia exchanged a shared look of confusion, dismay, and laughter. They both made their lunch orders as well once Mela could pull himself away from his chocolate milk. Emily chuckled. So, what's up with the chocolate thing?
Mela looked up at her, holding his cup with both hands as he supped, and pulled away from the glass with a chocolate mustache staining his lip.
It's a delicacy. We don't have this plant on our world, and it's only starting to be planted there. We had a traveler from your side give us small bars of it, and we quickly became fond of it. I recognized the name on the menu, and I knew it had to be good. But what is this liquid stuff that it's in? It's kind of thick, so it's not water.
Emily took a sip of her tea. "It's milk,"
Milk?
Mela asked, and he licked at his lips. Emily saw that his tongue was partially forked at the end, and she realized she hadn't noticed it until now. "Yeah, milk," Emily replied and made milking motions with her hands. Mela looked down at his milk, now looking more unsure than he had been.
Oh, I didn't know Minotaurs let you humans do that here.
Emily spluttered on her tea. "What? No, stupid, we have cows."
What's a cow?
Emily rolled her eyes and pulled out her phone, then spent the time before their food arrived showing Mela cows, chickens, moose, and how their cities looked before the Great Flood. As she swiped her thumb along the screen, the two of them leaning in towards each other over the top of the table, Mela gave a whistle as Emily started swiping through the news channels.
I feel bad for whoever has to clean this place up. Oracles didn't have good news either.
Emily felt a chill slowly meander down her spine, while her screen showed more sightings of flesh rafts. Oh! What did they say?" Mela bit down lightly on the end of his straw and pulled from it, humming happily as he did. When he was done, he rubbed at his cheeks, then saw Emily's curious expression.
Chocolate makes our cheeks tickle. No idea why, but, yeah, the Oracle said that someone of the human race would suffer for the sins of their own species. What did they say?
Mela screwed up his eyes in thought.
The chosen of the mother's flesh must suffer untold horrors upon their body and soul. Dangerous and perilous is their friendship, death always a part of their company. Even if the chosen survives their trials, their old self shall be dead, and there remains but a husk of what they once were. Or something like that. They tend to get a bit flowery and excessive with their word choice. Always hard to remember.
Emily's face was strained as she tried to keep her face pleasant, the corners of her eyes as tight as her smile. "Oh, is that all?"
Yeah, that was pretty much about it. Most of us are in agreement that whoever has to take on this quest is royally fucked.
Mela said with a tinkling laugh that caused the bells on his shamrocka to jingle along with him. Emily's nose wrinkled edgedly as he laughed, eyebrow twitching along with it.
So,
Mela continued, idly playing with one of his hair braids.
what kind of work does your company do? I read about how some of you run around finding magical trinkets and such to sell.
Emily decided to ease him into just what he had gotten himself into, and let the Lamian finish his lunch while she told him stories of her earlier dives. Once he had finished his last French fry, Emily brought her eyebrows together slightly, concentrating and working on a hypothesis she had been mulling over. "Currently, we've been given a new contract, one of much importance. It is why Augie hired you on in the first place. You could say it is dire in nature." Mela finished the last dregs of his chocolate milk and rubbed at his cheeks again with a smile.
Dire? How dire could treasure hunting be?
His smile faded away when Emily cupped her hands together, and he felt something enter their airspace, as if a ghost had suddenly appeared and sat next to them at the table. When Emily opened her hands to expose the object, Mela stared down wide-eyed at the stone, as did a few others who sat nearby. The stone did not sting their eyes or poison their nostrils as it once would have, but instead shone with hope and brilliance. "Well, let's just hope the crystal ball of your oracles was a little foggy on that day, and they didn't see everything they thought they had seen." Emily looked over at Mela from where she stood on the tarmac, and she couldn't help but smile. The Lamian must have been highly religious, as she could see him battling with his superstitions and wanting to be near Emily and the rest of the gang. Currently, he was unloading the custom-made rucksacks for the squad, as well as packing away extra uniforms and a few small gifts from his clan. Thanks to the deal from Ogledock, his clan had been boosted quite high in terms of earthly arrival fame, and had already upgraded their building to hold another floor due to the flow of orders coming in. This morning, Mela was wearing a rather loud anime shirt and even more metal bangles from his hair.
When she had spoken to him earlier, he had stated that his little sisters wanted to help do his hair, and they had been a bit excessive.
Emily, Bird should be here in 10.
Tarsh said, walking up beside her and shouldering his 240B machine gun. Normally these would be almost impossible to get, but Akeldok had contacts that he had greased with a few gems. "Thanks, Tarsh. Davin and Yopuya ready?" Emily asked and looked over her shoulder when she heard a loud thump noise. Tarsh spun around as well, and both of them watched as Yopuya launched another 40mm practice grenade into the distance, whooping in harpish as the little orange ball spun off into the grass. Beside her, Davin clapped politely, then handed her another practice 40mm grenade shell.
They're bored, which is dangerous.
Tarj murmured and turned back around to Mela, who was sliding towards them along the tarmac.
Where do you want these supply rucksacks?
Mela asked happily, pulling along beside him a rolling cart he had borrowed from the airstrip. "Just toss those in the sidecars," Emily said, and jerked her thumb towards both her Zundap and the Seafoam and Cream Indian chieftain, the two motorbikes and their sidecars glinting in the sunlight. Davin had offered up his own baby for the operation, and his taste to Emily was impeccable as far as she was concerned. Moril was still pissed that Akeldok wouldn't let them take a truck for the mission. But Akeldok wanted them in and out as fast as possible, and only their current ride could facilitate that. Mela whistled through his forked tongue as he slid over towards the bikes, and Tarj watched him with easy eyes.
What do you think, Emily? 3 of us left.
Emily looked up at him, arms crossed over the front of her brand-new combat uniform. "What do you mean?"
At the end of it all, how many of us are going to be left?
Tarj asked, and looked down at Emily with the eyes of someone who has seen it all before, just with a new backsplash this time. Emily chewed at her lip as she thought, while in the distance Moril blew a butterfly away from the receiver of her snub-nose M250 caliber heavy machine gun. The weapon itself needed a special bullet powder, so the round left the short barrel at max velocity, and Jameisha had a field day getting the formula right. Well, Tarj, at the end of the day, I have no control over that kind of thing. I can just hope that we all come back in one piece." Tarj blinked his eyes, lids held low as he watched Emily fidget, and he rolled the shoulder that his 240B was slung on.
That's optimistic, but not realistic. However, I do hope you get your wish, Emily.
"So do I," Emily whispered, and she felt a knot of worry work its way around her stomach. Their mission was to go back to the lake, at which the Crown would be there a day later at dawn. They would make contact with a pair of water nymphs that lived nearby, and they would give Emily the ability to both walk and breathe underwater for a short amount of time. After that, they would escort her to her objective, and then try to get her out as fast as possible.
Don't worry. Dying ain't so bad. After all, once you're dead, nothing is your problem anymore.
Tarsh said, and she heard him click open the tab of an RC Cola can. "You're really bad at this whole pep talk thing, you know that?" Emily said, her voice a mixture of both annoyance and humor.
Yep.
Tarsh chirped and took a swig from the can. Davin, Moril, and Yopuya made their way towards the pair along with Mela, and the Lamian began handing out the rest of the rucksacks.
Enough food for 1 week, dehydrated, full survival kits in each bag, extra ammunition and emergency sidearm, lights, matches, a few ward stones in case you get into contact with magicians, and of course extra clothes. Water and all that will be in the bicycles.
"Motorcycles, Mela," Moril corrected, and flicked the Lamian on his pointed ear. Mela growled, his pointed teeth flashing as he whipped his head around to grimace up at Moril.
Don't flick my fucking ear, you jumped up dog.
"Want me to show you what else these ends can do, gotta snake?" Moril barked, already clenching her fists in order to buckle the Lamian's face into a bowl. Before the two could come to blows, Emily cleared her throat, and she raised her eyebrows to the both of them. Without a word to either, Moril and Mela glowered at each other and looked away. Then Moril cocked an ear. "Big comin'."
Ipua right here.
Yopuya said, and held up a wing at full stretch, her M79 grenade launch slung around her back. Devin chuckled, then slung his bag over his shoulders, his scorpion slug across his chest.
Put your wing down, bird brain. You'll get it caught in the rotors.
Yopuya giggled and quickly brought her wing down, while the thump of the Stone Serenade's rotor blades got louder. The CH-53E Super Stallion making its turn along the strip for its landing. End of Chapter 12.
And that's the end of this chapter of Emily Bronze. Down below in the comments, let us know how our new voice actors are doing. Critiques, positive outlooks, attaboys, that kind of thing. They always help out voice actors and help us tune it in to where it should be. I'm sure all of you remember the Beldam's first video, don't you? If you like this video and others like them, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel of Guard Beardia, as well as hit the bell icon so you know when the videos go up through the week. There's also a Discord. We're handing out invites slowly for reasons. And again, check out our sponsors, Skull Splitter Dice, Redcon 1, the coffee link for donations, and stop by Neckbeardy as well, where you can find even more stories and more fun voice acting. But this has been Guard Bro, that was Cora, that was the Heuristic Rider, that was the Beldam, and this is Guard Beardia.